A custody exchange at this home in Northeast Harris County turned into a deadly shooting. So police say a woman and her husband drove here to pick up her baby from her ex-boyfriend, Gary Davis. But court documents show the ex was texting her terrifying threats the entire way, warning her not to bring her husband. When they arrived, the woman got her baby safely. But as she walked away, investigators say the ex charged out of the house and shot her husband twice right next to his truck. I learned through social media that the victim, Marlon Sanders, was an elementary school music teacher. Now, as for the suspect, Gary Davis, he is currently being held without bond, awaiting his first court hearing this Thursday.
Just after midnight on May 26, 2026, a 911 call came in from a residential street in Northeast Harris County, Texas. A man was down in the roadway. Harris County Precinct 3 deputies responded to the 12700 block of Blue Timbers Court, a quiet neighborhood near CE, King Parkway and East Little York Road. What they found when they arrived was not what anyone expects to find on a residential street at that hour. A woman was in the road, performing CPR on a man lying next to his truck. Their 9-month-old daughter was present. The man had been shot twice. The person responsible was already gone. No standoff, no confrontation still in progress. Just a street, a woman doing everything she could, a baby, and a man who had already lost more blood than the paramedics could work with. He was transported to the hospital by ambulance. He did not survive. His name was Marlon Sanders Sr. He was 36 years old, a music teacher, a football, baseball, and basketball coach, a singer, a DJ, and a musician who had spent more than 7 years building something real in the Port Arthur, Texas community. And on the night of May 26, 2026, he was standing by his truck on Blue Timbers Court, doing nothing wrong when 2 shots ended his life. Welcome to Homicide Vault, where every case is covered with the depth, the facts, and the detail it deserves. No headlines, no shortcuts, just the full story from the first 911 call to the final verdict. This is the Marlon Sanders case. If this is your first time here, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Every week, Homicide Vault breaks down real cases, the evidence, the investigation, and the legal outcome, so you always get the complete picture. Hit subscribe before we go any further, because this case goes much deeper than anything you have seen in the news cycle. And you need to hear all of it. To understand what happened on Blue Timbers Court, you first need to understand exactly who Marlon Sanders Sr. was, because the kind of man he was is directly tied to every decision he made in the final hours of his life. Marlon Sanders was 36 years old. He had spent more than 7 years working inside Port Arthur Independent School District in Port Arthur, Texas. He was not passing through. He was not building a resume on his way somewhere else. Port Arthur was his community. He had chosen it and he had stayed. By day, he was a music teacher at Staff Sergeant Lucian Adams Elementary School. On the field, he served as an assistant football and baseball coach at Memorial High School and also coached basketball. 3 sports, 1 district, 1 man who showed up to all of it, consistently, year after year. And when the school day ended, Marlon Sanders was still working. Outside of ISD, he was a professional singer, a DJ, and a musician, known throughout Port Arthur for his energy and his presence in the community. Music was not a side interest. It ran through every part of who he was. In 2025, he directed the Adams Elementary Choir in a live performance. Port Arthur ISD shared that video publicly as part of his memorial tribute in the days after his death. For anyone who watched it, That footage told you more about Marlon Sanders than any description could. He was present, he was locked in, he was exactly where he wanted to be. His colleagues already knew that without needing a video to confirm it. Dr. Shylunda Filer, the principal at Lucian Adams Elementary, recalled the first time she met Marlon Sanders. It was at teacher orientation. He walked up to her husband and told him directly, without hesitation, that he was going to take care of her. That was the first conversation between them. Dr. Filer later described him this way. He actually cared. It was a genuine care that he had for people and children. He had a heart, a huge heart for education. 7 years of working alongside someone tells you who they really are. And what Dr. Filer described was not a good employee. It was someone she trusted, someone who had become more than a colleague over time. Andre Bevel, the athletic director for Port Arthur ISD, put it plainly. "He's always been someone that I call a big teddy bear," Bevel said. "Someone you can lean on, a confidant." When Bevel learned what had happened, he struggled to process it. "It's a surreal moment," he said, "knowing that someone that you just spoke with, someone that you've had the opportunity to lead with, teach with, coach with. It's a moment that you don't really want to be real." Port Arthur ISD released a tribute graphic shortly after the news broke. The image was taken from the 2025 football season program. Surrounding his photo, music notes, a microphone, a football, a baseball, and the Titans fireball. Every role he held represented in a single image released by the district that employed him. District spokesperson Adrian Lott confirmed that the response inside the school system was immediate. The superintendent, members of the executive team, counselors, and social workers from across the district went directly to Lucian Adams Elementary the morning after. They did not wait. They went because Marlon Sanders was not a position that could be covered by a substitute. He was the energy inside that building. Staff members later described him as the school's hype guy, the one who walked into a room and shifted the atmosphere, who remembered students by name, who stayed when others left. The Sanders family released a public statement. They kept it short. They wrote, "It is with great sorrow that we share the passing of our husband, father, son, and brother, Marlon Jaron Sanders, Sr. During this difficult time, we ask that you keep our family in your prayers and allow us the privacy to grieve together. A husband, a father, a son, a brother. 7 years of students who learned music because of him. Athletes who ran drills under him. A community that knew his name long before any of this happened. Not because of a news report, but because he had earned that recognition one school year at a time." That was Marlon Sanders, and none of what he had built, none of what he stood for, none of who he was, prepared anyone around him for what was coming. Because the situation that put Marlon Sanders on a street in Northeast Harris County at midnight had been building quietly for a long time. It had a history. It had specific people involved, and it started with a decision that on the surface seemed like the right thing to do. Behind the professional record, behind the coaching roles and the music career and the 7 years inside Port Arthur ISD, Marlon Sanders had a personal life. And, like a lot of people, that personal life had gone through a difficult stretch. Court records confirm that Marlon and his wife went through a period of separation, approximately 3 years before the events of May 2026. The details of why they separated have not been made public, and this documentary will not speculate on that. What the records show is straightforward. At some point, the marriage reached a breaking point, and the two were living apart. During that separation, Marlon's wife entered into a relationship with another man. His name was Gary Davis. He was 38 years old at the time of the events documented in this case. Born on January 26, 1988, and lived in the Houston area. That relationship produced a child, a baby girl. She was 9 months old at the time of the events that would unfold on Blue Timbers Court. Before going any further, it is important to state what the public record does and does not show about Gary Davis. No prior criminal history for Gary Davis has been publicly reported or confirmed in any verified source, not in Harris County records, not in any sheriff's office release, and not in any news outlet that covered this case. His background beyond his age and his Houston area residence has not been detailed in any public law enforcement statement. That is where the documented record on Gary Davis begins and ends, prior to May 26, 2026. After the baby was born, Marlon and his wife made a decision together. They reconciled. They chose to rebuild their marriage with full knowledge of the circumstances that had developed during the time they were apart. That included a 9-month-old daughter who was biologically connected to Gary Davis. What happened next is the part of this story that most people do not expect. Rather than removing Davis from the picture entirely, Marlon and his wife agreed to allow him a relationship with his daughter. They set up a visitation arrangement. Davis was given access to the child. The handoffs happened on a regular basis. According to court records and law enforcement statements, Marlon's wife allowed the infant to stay with Davis for several days at a time during these visits. Marlon Sanders supported that arrangement. He did not fight it. He did not create obstacles. A man who was raising a child under his own roof, a child not biologically his, actively supported that child's access to her biological father. That was the agreement that had been in place. That was what had been working. But here is what the record also shows. Arrangements between people are only as stable as the mindset of everyone involved. And in the weeks and months leading up to May 26, 2026, the mindset of at least one person in this arrangement had begun to change. The handoffs that had once gone smoothly were becoming tense. The communication that had once been functional had started to break down. Something that had worked was now showing signs of fracture. And the documented evidence makes clear that the source of that fracture was not coming from Marlon Sanders. There is no record, no law enforcement statement, and no court document that places any blame for the deteriorating situation on Marlon or his wife. They had honored the arrangement. They had given Davis access to his daughter consistently. What investigators would later establish, through phone records, through witness accounts, and through documented communications, is that Gary Davis had become increasingly hostile toward the situation. Not in a way that had been reported to law enforcement before May 26th, not in a way that had produced any prior documented intervention, but in a way that had been building quietly, and that would soon express itself in a very specific and very deliberate way. The first hard evidence of just how far that hostility had gone did not come from an argument at a front door. It did not come from a confrontation at a school or a public place. It came through a text message sent from Gary Davis to Marlon's wife. Use language specific enough that investigators would later pull those messages as direct evidence in the case against him. What that message said and exactly when it was sent is what moves this case from a troubled co-parenting situation into the early stages of a criminal investigation. The baby had been with Gary Davis for several days. That is not a minor detail. It is confirmed across multiple verified sources. Click to Houston, WHO, and the Harris County Sheriff's Office official statement. This was not a brief afternoon handoff. The 9-month-old had been inside Davis's home for several days before the planned return. That context matters, because it explains why what came next was taken as seriously as it was, and why two people got in a truck late at night instead of waiting until morning. When it came time to collect the child, Marlon's wife reached out to arrange the pickup. What she received back was not cooperation. Gary Davis sent her a text message. Court records confirm the exact language he used. Davis told her directly in writing that he was on that type of time and that he was not going to return their daughter. Read that again. He was not asking for more time with the child. He was not requesting a change to the schedule. He was telling the mother of his child in a text message that he had decided he was keeping her. That phrase, on that type of time, carries a specific meaning. It is not a casual expression. It is a deliberate signal that the rules of the arrangement, the agreement that had been in place, no longer applied on his terms. He had made a unilateral decision, and he put it in writing. What makes those words legally significant is not just what they say, it is when they were sent. Those messages went out hours before anyone drove to Blue Timbers Court. This was not language exchanged in the middle of a confrontation. It was not a reaction to something that happened at the front door. These words were written, typed, and sent while everyone was still miles apart. And that timing is exactly what investigators focused on when they recovered those messages from his ex's phone. When law enforcement pulled those records, what they had was a time-stamped document of Davis's stated intentions before any physical encounter took place. That is the kind of evidence that shapes an entire prosecution. Marlon's wife showed Marlon the messages. They read what Davis had written. They understood what it meant. A 9-month-old who had already been away from home for several days was now being withheld by the man who had agreed to a visitation arrangement. Not a custody arrangement. Not a court order giving him the right to keep her. A visitation arrangement. And he had just texted that he was not honoring it. They made a decision together. They were going to go and get their daughter. It is worth being precise about what that decision represented. Marlon Sanders had a choice. This was not his biological child. There was no legal obligation requiring him to be in that truck. He could have stayed home. He could have told his wife to pursue other channels in the morning, to contact an attorney, to let the situation sit until daylight. He made none of those choices. He chose to go. Because that was the consistent pattern of how Marlon Sanders handled situations that needed handling. He showed up. So late in the evening on May 25, 2026, in the hours that would cross into May 26th, Marlon and his wife got into his truck and drove toward the Houston area, toward northeast Harris County, toward a residential street called Blue Timbers Court, where Gary Davis was staying with their daughter. The Harris County Sheriff's Office officially logs this as a May 26th incident, consistent with the 911 call that came in just after midnight. Some outlets reported May 25th, reflecting when the evening began. The sheriff's official record governs, and that record says May 26th. But the date on the calendar was not what mattered most in the hours that followed. What mattered was what those text messages had already documented. Prosecutors examining this case would later point to that specific exchange, the phrase Davis used, the time it was sent, the intent it communicated, as evidence that a decision had already been made before Marlon and his wife ever arrived on that street. Under Texas law, intent formed before an encounter carries different legal weight than a reaction formed during one. Those messages put Davis's intent on the record before the encounter ever began. He had not decided what he was going to do at the front door. The text messages show the decision had already been made, and Marlon Sanders was driving straight toward it.
I was just upstairs watching TV, and all I hear was a woman like screaming, saying, "Gary, give me my baby, Gary, give me my baby." And then, of course, I'm still hearing it, and that's when I heard like 2 gunshots. And right after that, that's when the woman was screaming, "You shot my husband, you shot my husband." I look out there, she doing CPR.
It's tragic, it is, because of the situation that happened. But we knew that gentleman there that lived there to have a lot of anger issues.
They arrived at Blue Timbers Court just after midnight. The 1212 sub 700 block of Blue Timbers Court sits in a residential neighborhood in northeast Harris County, near C. E. King Parkway and East Little York Road on the outskirts of Houston. At that hour, the street was quiet. Most residents were inside. Nothing about that block, at that hour, indicated that anything was about to happen. Marlon and his wife had a plan before either of them stepped out of the truck. It was deliberate, and it was straightforward. Marlon would stay by the truck. His wife would walk to the front door, collect their daughter, and come back. No engagement with Davis. No words exchanged between the two men. The goal was simple: get the child and leave. That was the agreement between them before the truck doors opened. His wife walked to the front door. She knocked. It was not Gary Davis who answered. It was his mother. Davis's mother came to the threshold with the 9-month-old in her arms and handed the baby over to Marlon's wife at the door. For a brief moment, everything appeared to be going exactly as planned. The child was out of the house. She was with her mother. The only thing left to do was walk back to the truck. Then a voice came from inside the house, Gary Davis. He called out one question and only one. He wanted to know who his ex was outside with. His wife did not respond. She turned from the door and began walking back toward the truck where Marlon was standing. What happened next took seconds. Gary Davis came out of that house. He did not pause on the porch. He did not call out a second time. He came through that front door moving, and he did not stop. He crossed the yard at a run directly toward Marlon Sanders, directly toward the truck, covering the distance between the front door and the roadway with one clear destination in mind. Marlon Sanders had not moved from where he was standing. Every verified account, every witness statement, every piece of physical evidence documented at the scene confirms the same thing. Marlon had not approached the house. He had not spoken. He had not taken a single step in Davis's direction. He was standing by his truck in the roadway, exactly where he and his wife had agreed he would wait. Davis reached the truck. He fired twice. Marlon Sanders went down in the roadway beside his truck. Davis did not remain at the scene. He did not call for help. He did not go back toward the house or check on anyone. He located a separate vehicle, not Marlon's truck, a different vehicle entirely, got in, and drove away from Blue Timbers Court. He left. Marlon's wife had their daughter in her arms when it happened. She was standing feet away from the truck. She watched it happen, and when it was over, she went to her husband in the road and began performing CPR. Neighbor Amber Howard was upstairs in her home watching television when the sounds reached her window. She heard a woman's voice first, screaming a name, demanding her baby back. Then she heard 2 gunshots. Then the screaming changed. It became something different. Howard went to her window and looked outside. Marlon's wife was in the roadway next to his truck, performing CPR. Amber Howard later described in her own words exactly what she heard that night. "All I hear is a woman screaming, 'Gary, give my baby. Gary, give my baby.' Then I heard 2 guns. After that, the woman was screaming, 'You shot my husband, you shot my husband.' I looked outside, and she was doing CPR. The 911 call came in just after midnight. Harris County Precinct 3 deputies responded to the 12700 block of Blue Timbers Court. They arrived to find Marlon Sanders on the ground in the roadway next to his truck. Life-saving measures were performed at the scene. He was transported by ambulance to the hospital. Marlon Jaron Sanders Sr. was pronounced dead, 36 years old, a music teacher, a coach, a husband, a father. He had driven to Blue Timbers Court to bring his daughter home. He had stayed by his truck exactly as planned. He had not engaged with Gary Davis in any way. Not a word, not a step toward that house, not one action on his part that any witness, any record, or any piece of physical evidence disputes. And the man who fired those 2 shots was already miles away. If you are watching this and you have not yet subscribed to Homicide Vault, this is the moment to do it, because what happened on Blue Timbers Court is only half of this story. The other half is what Harris County investigators did in the hours that followed, the evidence they documented at that scene, the records they pulled, and the case they built from the ground up against Gary Davis. That is where this documentary goes next. Subscribe to Homicide Vault right now and turn on notifications. Every case on this channel gets the same treatment: verified facts, full investigation breakdowns, and the complete picture from the first 911 call to the final legal outcome. Hit subscribe. The investigation starts now.
It sounded like firecrackers, but super, super loud. Like, they sounded like so close. Like, it kind of had my ear ringing a bit. That's what it sounded like. It was just 2 shots.
When Harris County Precinct 3 deputies arrived at Blue Timbers Court just after midnight, Gary Davis was already gone. But what he left behind on that street gave investigators a starting point that most homicide cases never get: a scene rich with physical evidence, multiple witnesses, and a documented paper trail that began hours before the first shot was fired. The response that night was not limited to patrol deputies. Harris County Sheriff Ed Gonzalez publicly confirmed that the investigation brought in EXO homicide detectives, Harris County crime scene investigators, the Violent Criminals Apprehension Team, known as VCAT K9 units, and air support. That kind of multi-agency mobilization does not happen for routine calls. It happens when law enforcement recognizes immediately that what they are dealing with requires everything they have. Investigators got to work on that street while the scene was still fresh. And what they documented, layer by layer, built a case that stood on 6 separate pillars, each one independent, each one significant on its own, and all of them pointing at the same person. The first thing Harris County CSI documented was the physical position of Marlon Sanders. He was found in the roadway next to his truck, not at the front door, not on the porch, not anywhere near the house where Gary Davis had been standing. He was in the road beside his truck, at a distance from that front door, exactly where every witness account placed him before Davis came outside. That positioning was not just a detail, it was evidence. It told investigators that Davis had not reacted to someone standing in his doorway. He had come out of that house, crossed the yard, and traveled to the roadway to reach Sanders. That distance, from the front door of the house to where Sanders was found next to his truck was measured, documented, and preserved by crime scene investigators. It became one of the most important physical facts in the entire case. Investigators also confirmed that no weapon was recovered from Marlon Sanders or from his truck. He was unarmed. That finding has not been disputed by a single verified source. The second pillar was eyewitness testimony, and there was more of it than Davis may have expected on a residential street at that hour. Multiple neighbors had come outside after hearing the sounds from the street. Several had a clear line of sight to Davis as he left the property. Their accounts were taken separately, documented individually, and cross-referenced against the physical evidence at the scene. They held up. Amber Howard, who lived nearby, gave an account that became one of the most precise pieces of witness testimony in the case. She had not been outside. She had been upstairs watching television when the sounds reached her. She heard a woman's voice screaming a name, demanding her baby back. Then she heard 2 shots. Then the screaming changed into something else entirely. She went to her window and looked out. What she saw was Marlon's wife in the roadway next to the truck, performing CPR. Howard's account gave investigators a complete, sequenced audio record of what happened on that street, and it matched the physical evidence at every point. Davis's own mother was also a witness investigators needed to speak with. She had answered the front door. She had been the one to hand the infant over to Marlon's wife. She was on or near that property when Davis came outside. Her position made her a first-hand witness not only to the exchange at the door, but to everything she observed from inside that house before it happened. The third pillar was the text messages, and this is where the timeline of the case shifted significantly. Law enforcement recovered the messages Davis had sent to his ex in the hours before the shooting. The specific language he used, the timestamps on each message, the content of the threat to withhold their daughter. Those records were already on her phone when deputies arrived on ISD. Investigators did not have to search for them. They were presented with documented evidence of Davis's stated intentions, written in his own words, sent before anyone drove to Blue Timbers Court that night. Under Texas law, intent established before an encounter, not during it, carries direct legal weight in a murder prosecution. Those messages put that intent on the record. The fourth pillar was the moment Davis left. He did not stay at the scene. He did not call 911. He did not attempt to help anyone. When it was over, he located a separate vehicle, not Marlon's truck, a different vehicle that was already available to him, and drove away. Under Texas law, leaving the scene following a crime is admissible in court as evidence of what is legally referred to as consciousness of guilt. Investigators documented his departure as part of the case from the beginning. The fact that a separate vehicle was used, already accessible to Davis at that location, was also noted and logged. The fifth pillar is the one that reveals the most about Davis's state of mind in the minutes after he drove away. He started calling his ex, repeatedly, from his own number. Within a short time of leaving Blue Timbers Court, Davis was on the phone trying to reach her. When she handed the phone to a responding deputy at the scene, Davis hung up immediately. Then he called back, from different numbers, one after another. She did not answer. Law enforcement logged every single call, the numbers, the timestamps, and the frequency. What that pattern documented was not someone in shock. It was not someone who had acted impulsively and was now overwhelmed by what happened. It was someone actively trying to find out what was being communicated to law enforcement at that scene, from a safe distance, in real time. Investigators recognized exactly what those calls represented. The sixth pillar was the arrest. Davis was not on Blue Timbers Court when the first deputies arrived. He had left. Locating him required VCAT, a specialized unit within the Harris County Sheriff's Office focused specifically on tracking down individuals connected to serious crimes, working alongside K-9 units and air support. Harris County Sheriff Ed Gonzalez issued a public statement confirming Davis as the defendant and specifically acknowledged the work of every unit that contributed to bringing him in. The sheriff stated directly, "Great work by everyone involved in the investigation and arrest." Davis was located. He was taken into custody without incident, no standoff, no resistance, no dramatic conclusion to his apprehension. He was found, and the process of holding him accountable formally began. One important point on the medical record in this case. As of the production of this documentary, the Harris County Medical Examiner's Office has not publicly released formal findings in the death of Marlon Sanders. The cause of death is confirmed across all verified sources as a result of the shooting on Blue Timbers Court on May 26, 2026. Sanders was transported by ambulance from the scene and was pronounced dead at the hospital. Homicide Vault does not speculate beyond what the confirmed public record shows, and the medical examiner's formal findings have not been made public at this time. What law enforcement had assembled by the time Gary Davis was in custody was not a case built on a single witness or a single piece of evidence. It was 6 independent pillars: the documented crime scene, the eyewitness accounts, the text messages sent hours before the shooting, Davis's departure from the scene, his phone behavior in the minutes that followed, and the multi-agency investigation that ended in his arrest. Every pillar stood independently. Every pillar pointed in the same direction. Gary Davis was booked into the Harris County Jail. The charge filed against him was murder, and the question that now moved to the center of this case was not whether he had been identified. He had been. The question was what the legal system was going to do about it, and what the evidence meant under Texas law. Gary Davis was booked into the Harris County Jail following his arrest. The charge filed against him was murder, not manslaughter, not aggravated assault. Murder, the most serious charge the state of Texas could bring in connection with the death of Marlon Sanders Sr. Prosecutors moved quickly on the question of bond. A formal motion was filed requesting that Davis be held without bond entirely. That motion was granted. As confirmed by Fox 26 and 12 News Now, no bond was set for Gary Davis. As of the production of this documentary, he remains inside the Harris County Jail in custody, with no release date and no bond amount on the table. Now, to understand what the state of Texas is working with, you need to understand what the murder charge actually requires under the law, and why the evidence from Blue Timbers Court connects directly to that legal standard in a way that is difficult to argue around. Texas Penal Code Section 1902 defines murder as intentionally or knowingly causing the death of another person. That definition does not require a written plan. It does not require weeks of preparation. What it requires is that the person who caused the death did so with intent, and that the intent was present at the time the act occurred. This is where the text messages become more than just background detail. Davis sent those messages hours before the shooting, not during a face-to-face argument, not in the heat of a confrontation. He sent them while he was inside his home and Marlon Sanders was still miles away in Port Arthur. He communicated, in his own words, that he was not going to return the child. He signaled in writing that the normal terms of the arrangement were no longer in effect on his end. Those messages were time-stamped. They were recovered from his ex's phone by investigators, and they placed his stated intent on the record before a single car turned onto Blue Timbers Court that night. Under Texas law, that matters. Intent formed before an encounter, not as a reaction during it, satisfies the legal standard for an intentional act. The prosecution does not need to prove Davis planned this for weeks. They need to prove he intended it. The text document that he did, in his own words, hours in advance. Then there is what the crime scene itself documents. Davis did not fire from his front door. He did not fire from his porch. He did not fire from the edge of his yard. He came out of that house, moved across the yard, and reached the public roadway to Sanders' truck before firing twice. That distance, documented by Harris County CSI and confirmed by multiple independent witnesses, is not consistent with a man defending himself from an immediate threat at his door. It is consistent with a man who made a decision, moved toward it, and acted on it. That distinction is the reason a self-defense argument faces serious obstacles in this case. Texas law does allow the use of deadly force in self-defense, but only under specific conditions. The person claiming self-defense must demonstrate a reasonable belief that force was immediately necessary to protect themselves against unlawful, deadly force coming from the other party. 3 conditions must be present at the same time: a reasonable belief, an immediate threat, and unlawful deadly force from the other person. Look at those 3 conditions against what the evidence shows. Marlon Sanders was unarmed, confirmed by crime scene investigators. not disputed by any verified source. No weapon was recovered from Sanders or from his truck. Marlon Sanders was stationary. He was standing next to his truck in the roadway when Davis reached him. He had not moved toward the house. He had not advanced toward Davis at any point. That position is confirmed by multiple independent witnesses and by the crime scene documentation produced by Harris County CSI. Marlon Sanders made no aggressive move. There is no witness account, no physical evidence, and no documented record of any kind that places any threatening action on Sanders' part before Davis fired. Not one of the three legal conditions for self-defense holds up against the evidence in this case. The person Davis ran toward was unarmed and standing still. The distance Davis traveled from that front door to the truck removes any argument that he was reacting to an immediate threat in his doorway, and the text messages sent hours before the encounter remove any claim that this was a spontaneous reaction to something unexpected. As of the production of this documentary, no formal defense strategy has been publicly filed or announced in this case. What is presented here is a legal analysis grounded in the documented evidence and the applicable Texas law, not speculation about how the defense intends to proceed. This channel does not go beyond what the confirmed record supports. What the confirmed record supports is this: the state of Texas has a murder charge, a defendant in custody with no bond, a crime scene that corroborates every eyewitness account, text messages that document pre-encounter intent in Davis's own words, an unarmed victim whose position is verified across all sources, and 6 independently documented pillars of evidence assembled by a multi-agency investigation. The next formal step in this case is the grand jury process, where the evidence is presented to a panel of citizens who will decide whether probable cause exists to formally indict Gary Davis on the murder charge. As of the production of this video, no grand jury indictment has been publicly confirmed. What has been confirmed is the charge, the custody status, and the strength of the evidentiary record law enforcement built in the hours and days following May 26, 2026. The legal process is moving. The case is in the system. And the question that now sits in front of the Harris County court system is what accountability looks like for the death of Marlon Sanders. But while that process was beginning in Harris County, 50 miles away, in Port Arthur, a community was waking up to the news that one of their own was gone. And what they did in response is something that needs to be documented as part of this case. You just came through the full investigation breakdown and the complete legal analysis of this case. If that is the level of coverage you want on every true crime case you follow, subscribe to Homicide Vault right now and turn on the bell notification. This channel covers the evidence, the law, and the full story from start to finish on every case we take on. Hit subscribe before we move forward. Because what Port Arthur did when they heard the news about Marlon Sanders is the next chapter of this story, and it is one worth hearing. On the morning of May 26, 2026, 50 miles from Blue Timbers Court, the staff and students of Staff Sergeant Lucian Adams Elementary School in Port Arthur, Texas, arrived to news that changed everything about that day. Marlon Sanders was gone. What happened inside Port Arthur ISD in the hours that followed was immediate, organized, and documented. District spokesperson Adrian Lott confirmed publicly that the superintendent, members of the executive team, and counselors and social workers from across the entire district went directly to Lucian Adams Elementary that morning. They did not send a memo. They did not issue a statement and wait. The leadership of Port Arthur ISD physically showed up to that school because they understood that what had happened overnight was not something a building full of children and educators could process without support standing right next to them. Inside the school, staff gathered in the classroom where Marlon Sanders had taught music. They shared stories. They played music. They sat together in the space he had occupied every working day for years and tried to make sense of something that did not lend itself to easy explanation. They remembered him the way people who actually knew him remembered him. Not through formal language, but through specifics. He was the hype guy. The one who walked into a room and immediately shifted the energy in it. The one who knew students by name, who showed up early and stayed late, who treated the work of teaching children music as something that mattered beyond a job title or a paycheck. Port Arthur ISD released an official public statement that named every role Marlon Sanders had held inside the district. The statement read, "Our beloved Adams Elementary School music teacher, Titans football and basketball coach, and singer, DJ, and musician will be missed by so many. We invite our community to share fond memories and words of comfort." The district also shared links to a 2025 Adams Elementary Choir performance that Sanders had directed, posted as part of the memorial tribute so that anyone who had not seen him work with students could see for themselves what his colleagues had observed every single day. Reporter Danielle Tewa-Polau conducted on-camera interviews with school staff in the days following the shooting, capturing first-hand accounts from the people who had worked alongside Sanders directly. Those interviews documented a consistent portrait of a man who brought something to that building that was difficult to replace and impossible to replicate on short notice. Dr. Shailunda Filer, the principal at Lucian Adams Elementary, spoke about what Sanders had meant to that school from the moment he first walked through the door. She described a man whose care for people and for children was not a performance. It was consistent, it was present, and it showed up in the way he moved through that building every day. In her own words, he had a heart, a huge heart for education, and the people around him felt it without having to be told it was there. Andre Bevel, the athletic director for Port Arthur ISD, described Sanders as someone who had been a source of steadiness for the people around him, a confidant, a presence that staff and colleagues leaned on when things were hard. When Bevel was asked to put into words what it felt like to process this loss, he said, "It's a moment that you don't really want to be real." That one sentence said more than any formal tribute could, but the response in Port Arthur did not stop at words. On the same day that staff were inside Lucian Adams Elementary sitting with their grief, something arrived at the school from outside. A community organization called the Nehemiah Crew, led by Pastor Wanda L. Bodden, pulled up to the campus with more than 20 raised garden containers. They had come to restart something that had been left unfinished for years. The project was called the Garden of Hope. It had originally been a campus beautification and educational initiative, a plan to bring a working garden to the school grounds for students to tend and learn from. The project had stalled after Hurricane Harvey hit the region and had not moved forward since. On the morning that Port Arthur learned Marlon Sanders was gone, Pastor Wanda L. Bodden and the Nehemiah Crew made the decision to bring it back, to restart it on that day in his memory, at the school where he had spent years of his life. This was confirmed by KFDM Fox 4 Beaumont. More than 20 raised garden containers delivered to a school in mourning. On the same morning, staff members were inside the building trying to hold each other together. Not a candlelight vigil. Not a moment of silence held in a gymnasium. A garden, something that requires tending, something that grows over time, something that produces life. Planted at the school where Marlon Sanders had done his work, on the day Port Arthur said goodbye to him. That is what the community chose to do with their grief. They built something. Port Arthur ISD did not lose a staff member on May 26, 2026. They lost someone who had been a fixed presence inside that institution for more than 7 years. Someone whose work in those hallways, on those fields, and inside that music classroom had shaped the daily experience of students and staff alike. The response from the district leadership, from the colleagues who sat together in his classroom, from the reporter who documented their accounts, and from the community organizations that showed up that morning without being asked. All of it reflected exactly what kind of person Marlon Sanders had been while he was alive. He had put years of work into that community, and on the day they lost him, that community showed up in return. As of the production of this documentary, Gary Davis remains inside the Harris County Jail. No bond, no release date, no trial date on the calendar. The murder charge filed against him following his arrest is the charge that currently stands on the record, confirmed by Fox 26 and 12 News Now. And what happens next is now in the hands of the Harris County court system and the Harris County District Attorney's Office. Most people see the arrest and assume the next step is a courtroom. In Texas, it is not that straightforward. There is a process, a specific legal sequence that every felony case must move through before a jury ever hears a single word of testimony. Understanding that process is the only way to understand where this case actually stands right now. The first step has already happened. Davis was arrested. He was charged with murder at the law enforcement level. He is in custody with no bond. That is the confirmed public record as it stands today. The next required step under Texas law is the grand jury. Before any felony charge in Texas can proceed to a full trial, the evidence must be presented to a grand jury, 12 citizens who review what investigators have assembled and determine whether probable cause exists to formally indict the defendant. This is not a trial. The grand jury does not weigh guilt or innocence. Their job is narrower than that. They decide whether the documented evidence is strong enough to move the case into the full court process. Given what law enforcement assembled on and around Blue Timbers Court, the text messages sent hours before the shooting, the crime scene documentation, the multiple independent witness accounts, the flight from the scene, and the post-incident phone records, the evidentiary foundation that would be presented to a grand jury in this case is substantial. As of the production of this documentary, no grand jury indictment for Gary Davis has been publicly confirmed or reported by any verified news source. That does not mean the process has stalled. It means the outcome has not been made public. This channel reports what is confirmed. Nothing more. If the grand jury returns an indictment, Davis moves to arraignment, a formal court appearance where he enters a plea in response to the charge. That plea sets the direction the case takes from that point forward. A not guilty plea moves the case toward trial. Other outcomes are also possible at that stage. After arraignment comes discovery and pretrial motions. Both sides exchange evidence. The defense reviews everything the prosecution has. And during this phase, attorneys can file motions, requests to exclude specific evidence, to challenge how records were collected, or to contest the admissibility of certain materials before a jury ever sees them. In this case, that process could include challenges to the text messages, to the eyewitness accounts, or to elements of the crime scene documentation. No such motions have been publicly filed as of this production. If the case moves through pre-trial without a resolution, it goes before a jury. At that point, the burden falls entirely on the state of Texas. Prosecutors must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Gary Davis intentionally or knowingly caused the death of Marlon Sanders, and that no legal justification existed for what he did. Every pillar of evidence that law enforcement documented becomes part of what the state presents in that courtroom. But a trial is not the only path this case can take. When the evidentiary record is as thoroughly documented as this one, pre-crime texts in Davis's own words, multiple witnesses who corroborate each other, a crime scene that matches every account, and a pattern of behavior after the shooting that investigators logged in real time, a plea agreement becomes a realistic possibility before a jury is ever seated. A plea deal would involve Davis entering a guilty plea in exchange for an agreed sentence, resolving the case without the full trial process. Whether the Harris County District Attorney's Office pursues that path, or whether Davis and any defense team request it, has not been reported as of this production. What has been confirmed is the sentencing range if this case reaches a conviction. Under Texas law, a murder conviction carries a punishment range of 5 years to 99 years or life in prison. In Texas, the same jury that decides the verdict also determines the sentence, in a separate punishment phase that follows a guilty finding. During that phase, everything is on the table. The text messages Davis sent hours before the shooting, the deliberate movement from the front door to the roadway, the flight from the scene in a separate vehicle, the phone calls made from multiple numbers in the minutes that followed. All of it is admissible as the jury considers what the documented facts of this case are worth in terms of time. That is where this case stands today. Davis is in custody. The charge is filed. The process is moving, and the Harris County court system will work through each stage on its own timeline. What this documentary cannot answer, and will not speculate on, is the outcome. Whether this goes to trial or ends in a plea, whether a jury sentences Davis to decades or to life, whether the grand jury formally indicts before this video reaches 1 million views or after. What this documentary can tell you is that when any of those developments happen, Homicide Vault will be here covering them with the same depth and the same standard of verified information that you have seen throughout this case. One question. Leave it in the comments. What do you believe the outcome of this case should be? And what does the evidence support? Read what other people say. Come back when the case moves. This channel follows cases from the first 911 call to the final verdict. And this case is far from over.
Hey, what's good, Port Arthur? Walking out the library right now. I just voted. Make sure you get out and vote. Your voice matter. Your vote count. Brandon Partee, Precinct 2, Justice of the Peace.
Marlon Sanders Sr. held 3 jobs at the same time and showed up to all of them. He taught music to children who needed someone to take that seriously. He coached athletes across 3 sports at Memorial High School. He performed as a singer and a DJ in the community that had become his home over more than 7 years. He did all of that simultaneously, consistently, and without a documented complaint from a single person who worked alongside him. And when his marriage went through one of the hardest things a marriage can go through, a separation, another relationship, a child born from that relationship, he handled it the way the documented record shows he handled everything else. He cooperated. He supported the arrangement. He showed up. On the night he was killed, he drove to Blue Timbers Court. He stayed by his truck. He said nothing to Gary Davis. He took no aggressive action. He made no threatening move. He stood exactly where he and his wife had agreed he would stand, and he waited. Not one witness account disputes that. Not one piece of physical evidence contradicts it. Not one document in the entire verified record of this case places any responsibility for what happened on Marlon Sanders. Gary Davis had a daughter he was allowed to see. He had a visitation arrangement that the people he reportedly resented had chosen to honor and maintain. He had a path forward that required nothing more from him than showing up for his child and following the terms of an agreement that was already working. He had every reason, legal, practical, and parental, to let that night go the way it was supposed to go. He walked out of that house with a different plan. Andre Bevel, the man who worked alongside Marlon Sanders inside Port Arthur ISD and who knew him, as a colleague and a confidant, put the weight of this loss into a single sentence that does not require anything added to it. It's a moment that you don't really want to be real. That is what the people closest to Marlon Sanders have been sitting since May 26, 2026. The legal process that follows, the grand jury, the potential indictment, the arraignment, whatever path this case ultimately takes through the Harris County court system, will determine what formal accountability looks like. That process will take time. It will move through stages, and it will eventually produce an outcome that the public record will reflect. But there is something that process will not produce and cannot change. It will not change what Marlon Sanders built inside Port Arthur ISD over 7 years. It will not change the accounts of every colleague who described him as the kind of person a building leans on. It will not change the fact that on the morning Port Arthur learned he was gone, a community organization showed up to his school with garden containers and restarted a project in his name. Not because anyone organized it, but because that is the kind of response a man like Marlon Sanders produces in the people whose lives he touched. 7 years of students who learned music in his classroom. Athletes who ran drills under his instruction. A principal who said he told her husband he would take care of her. On the day they met, a community that responded to his loss by planting something that grows. That is not a headline, that is a record. A documented, sourced, verified record of a life that was worth considerably more than what happened on Blue Timbers Court on the night of May 26, 2026. The Harris County court system will determine what Gary Davis faces for what he did that night. What it cannot determine, and what no legal proceeding has the power to touch, is what Marlon Sanders was worth. That record was already written, and it stands exactly as it is. Homicide Vault covers true crime cases with verified facts, complete investigations, and full legal analysis, from the first 911 call to the final verdict. If that is the standard you want from every case you follow, Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on the bell notification so you never miss a case when it drops. One question for the comments before you go. Based on everything the documented evidence shows in this case, what outcome do you believe the Harris County court system should deliver for Marlon Sanders? Leave your answer below. Read what others are saying. Come back when this case moves forward, because Homicide Vault will be here when it does. There is another case on this channel waiting for you right now. Click the next video